The Spook Who Sat by the Door is a novel that was written in 1969. It was made into a movie in 1973 and focuses on the issue of black militancy. A black man apparently works for the system, but in reality he is a freedom fighter. Well, more than a century before the book was written, at the start of the so-called Second Seminole War, there was a real-life spook who sat by the door. His name was Louis Pacheco. He was a talented and educated slave. According to the historical record, he was, quote, faithful, intelligent, trustworthy, well-bred, polite, accomplished, and could read, write, and spoke the Spanish, French, English, and Indian languages. He was also very familiar with the area near which the so-called black exiles, which were really self-emancipated black people, better known as Maroons, were living in Florida. Because of his talents, he was contracted out by his slave master to Major Dade of the United States military. His job was to act as a guide for the military and show them the best vantage point from which to attack the self-emancipated black people as well as their indigenous allies. The field slaves were envious of Louis Pacheco, as he would fit the description of what we have for generations referred to as a house Negro. Despite his status, he was well aware of the fact that he was a slave nevertheless. As the field slaves envied him, Pacheco envied the freedom of the so-called Maroons. According to the record, Pacheco had a relationship with the Maroons and Seminoles. As he learned of the military's plans to attack, he would find a way to notify the so-called Maroons and Seminoles. At this time, the so-called Maroons had been self-emancipated over a century. As far as they were concerned, they were free and would do anything to prevent themselves from becoming slaves again. For over 100 years they had been at war with the United States government. Their very existence was a constant threat to the stability of the slave system, as their territories were destinations for runaway slaves. The indigenous population and Maroons had long intermarried, so much so that they were really like one people. The United States military attacking the self-emancipated black people was the same as attacking the Seminoles. Whites made it a habit of raiding villages, kidnapping children, and selling them into slavery. The Maroons and Seminoles were always on guard and seeking an opportunity for revenge. Pacheco gave them an advantage by simply informing them of the white man's plan. The Maroons and Seminoles laid down their plan of attack. Being trusted by the officers as a good slave, Pacheco directed the soldiers where to attack. The trap had been set. Unbeknownst to the officers, the Allies allowed the United States military to advance into the kill zone. Once the soldiers were in full sight and unprotected, the Allies opened fire, dropping half the troops at once. Pacheco joined the fight, killing his share of soldiers. The remaining troops began running for cover, but before they could take cover, another quarter of the soldiers were dropped. Those that were dropped were scalped by the warriors. Those that escaped to their military base were pursued by the Maroons and eliminated. Louis Pacheco was emancipated due to the role he played in winning the battle. He has been deemed one of the most dangerous enemies of the United States at that time in Florida. This spook who sat by the door traded his comfort and status under white authority for emancipation of himself and his people. This article was written by Daku Akabo wa Akatu.